Okay, so Chandra Easton here, esoteric astrologer, just going to talk a little bit about the Bondi Beach massacre that's happened just a few days ago in Australia on the 14th of December. It's a very rare thing to happen in Australia that we have gun crime, and it's sort of kind of a bit of a wake-up call, really, I suppose you would say, for all kinds of reasons. Okay. Before I look at the chart, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on the planet, which I've referred to as the global battle. And then I'll look at the chart, and then I'll just read a few words from the reading, Citadel of Love. Okay, so we have many on the planet at the moment. From an esoteric perspective, we would say that the wars are between light and dark, and between the dark brotherhood or the shadow aspect of humanity. And the shadow aspect or the dark brotherhood, of course, they need humans, they need organisations, they need individuals to work through. And they work through the globalist cabal. Talked about them a little bit earlier in the year in the talk on the Bilderberg group. They work through the military-industrial complex in America and in other places. They work through the Zionists, whether that's Israel or globally or America. And their goal, really, of the Dark Brotherhood and therefore the globalist cabal is to have permanent global war. Because this is the way to stay in control, this is the way to generate fear, this is the way to make enormous amounts of money, this is the way to control humanity. I'm sure you know about the plans that have been put out sort of for 2030, and we're only a few short years away from that, about how we'll have one world government, and this will be run by the technocrats, and we will all be controlled, and life will be orchestrated according to technology. So this is the Dark Brotherhood's plan for humanity, which basically is founded in hatred and fear. And the policies of the Dark Brotherhood are to divide and conquer and to create enemies. Other people, this could be the Arabs, the Muslims, the Middle Eastern, anyone who's the other. So the goal is separation, division, and conquering using fear and hatred. We know that's the way they work. The spiritual hierarchy, on the other hand, work the opposite way. They work in the name of love. And they draw to them those individuals, those groups, those nations, those parliaments who strive for goodness. And just as the Dark Brotherhood work with fear and hatred, the spiritual hierarchy, the holy ones, work to foster unity and to remind humanity that we are a brother-sisterhood and we are one humanity. And their work and their focus and their impetus is in the name of love. And that's what's going on the planet at the moment. We know that in the end, love will be what saves us all. Okay, so how's this connected to Australia and the Bondi Beach massacre? I think the government have just in the last 24 hours, 2 days maybe, traced back and realised that the two individuals who were responsible for the 15 dead people at the beach were ISIS terrorists, and they think that they were trained in the Philippines, even though they were living in Australia. They had weapons that were legally obtained in Australia, but that they had an ISIS flag in their vehicle, which was seen by, it's not just reported by the government, but it was actually seen by people in Bondi. So the way I look at anything on a political level is to follow the money. So say, well, why would two lone ISIS terrorists want to bring mayhem and murder to a beach in Australia? And it was something that I'd heard some years ago, but I was reminded again recently that ISIS was actually created by the CIA, and this was revealed in 2014 with Hillary Clinton's emails and exposed to the world by Julian Assange in 2016, that this is what happens is people who work within organisations or governments who work for the Dark Brotherhood, they're trying to use power and money and corruption to control. And sometimes they will create something that has an evil face, thinking that they can control it. So the ISIS, or the ISIL as it was called, was created by the American CIA and funded by the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who are both operating under the global cabal, operating hand in glove, you might say, with the CIA, the American CIA. So this is the history of where the money comes from. So we immediately have to start to think, okay, well, what have Saudi Arabia or Qatar or America got against Australia? Why would there be assassinations on a beach? But not only is it created by the CIA and funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but it's actually supported by their allies. This is Mossad in Israel and MI6 in Britain, and no doubt other secret service organisations around the world. Yeah, so there are organisations that are working for darkness, working for control, working for the perpetual wars. And this has been brought to Australia. Let's have a look at the chart. I find my little pointer. Okay, so we have a mutable T-square, and you'll see the mutable. First of all, you'll see the Sagittarian planets here. We have Venus in Sagittarius, the Sun in Sagittarius, Vulcan in Sagittarius, and Mars in Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius in the higher turn of the spiral is the most tolerant, one of the most open to different people from different cultures and different religions. But in its lowest vibration, it holds great xenophobia, great racism, and is often indicated in religious upheaval and religious wars. So as an astrologer, immediately we look to the Sagittarian stellium, and then you'll notice the T-square goes from the Sun and Vulcan and Mars through all these red lines up here to Saturn and Neptune, the square between Saturn, Neptune and Sagittarius. So what happens with the Saturn and Neptune conjunctions? This is the last gasp of the Piscean age, and there's often a lot of cloak and dagger and things that are hidden deep beneath the surface when those two planets are together in its lowest vibration. And there's a lot of delusion and a lot of misguided loyalty and a lot of outright lies. And so this combination, and then the chart goes down to the squares to the Earth in the 22nd degree of Gemini. Now, the interesting thing about the sign of Gemini is that it's the mediatory sign that is there to help us learn the difference between the rational mind that the ego uses and the higher mind, if you like, lies and wisdom, or what's true or not true. And the Earth is the esoteric ruler of the sign of Sagittarius. So on a soul perspective, try and get out of the sun in my eyes there. From a soul perspective, with the Earth in Gemini and Gemini rising, the purpose is to use our discrimination, to use our heart wisdom, not to believe what we immediately see or read or are told, but to weigh it through the heart, because that's what we need to do. Otherwise, we can end up in the lower vibration of Sagittarius, which is this xenophobic, racist delusions. Okay, so it's not a very easy, and of course with a mutable T-square, things keep changing. So you think you know what the truth is, and then there's another layer of it, and then you get one handle of that truth, and you think, oh, this is the real truth, and then there's another layer of it. So we have to take away the layers of lies and sift them out of the way. Now, Mars is in the 29th degree of Sagittarius void, of course, which means that, and of course, Mars is associated with war and it's associated with weapons. I might just close my curtain that's shining in my eyes. It's better. Mars is associated with weaponry and murder and, artillery and, shooting. And, these two individuals are literally hunting people who were there at the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Okay, so Mars is operating in a very extreme manner in Sagittarius, and you'll see this tight square to Saturn. And generally speaking, with a Mars-Saturn square, there's something in the background that some kind of organisation or structure, or dare I say government, that's in the background driving this violence and murder. So the question I asked myself, well, and of course what happened within sort of an hour or two, I think it was, of this occurring last Sunday evening, was that Benjamin Netanyahu started lecturing the Australians and screaming about how we were creating a hotbed of, people who were opposed to Jewish, and basically calling us evil, calling the Australian government evil because of creating a scenario where this could happen. And of course, this is the man that spent 2 years with genocide against the Palestinian people. So immediately, for most people who've got any kind of discrimination, you'd think, why is Netanyahu so quick off the mark? First of all, to blame the Iranians, just the first thing that he did, and then to blame the Australians. And so it's okay, I smell a rat here somewhere. Is this some kind of, is there a false flag? And if you're going to ask yourself what's really going on, you've got to say, well, who benefits? Who benefits from attack upon Jewish people? And of course, you wouldn't immediately think that this could possibly be Mossad operating at the behest of the Israeli government to murder their own people, except that we have a precedent for this. And the precedent for this was the 7th of October, 2023. And we have many accounts have come out now from soldiers who reported that they were told to stand down and to allow to basically go off duty so that the events of the 7th of October could take place. And then, of course, there's a perfect excuse, if you like, to come in full force and attack the Palestinians. So it's not the first time that Jewish population have been dispensable and used as used for such malevolence. So that's one thing that I ask myself, who would benefit and who's making the greatest noise about this? And of course, most people need to understand that there's a difference between what the Zionists want, which is absolute control, Zionists who are hand in glove with the global cabal, as opposed to ordinary Jewish people. And no doubt there are elements all around the planet of people who are anti-Semitic, but there's a very great difference between racism directed against the Jewish people versus the Zionist agenda, which would like everybody to believe that the motivation is anti-Semitism. But I ask myself, isn't the motivation for perpetual war? And who is it who's seeking perpetual war? And I come back to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Mossad and CIA. And of course, the other thing is who funds the terrorists, and that's those groups, and who are supported by them. Yeah, so if you look at the major wars that are going on at the moment, we have the supposed peace plan or the peace accord that's happening in the Middle East with the Palestinians, whereas in fact there's no peace at all. The murders continue, the escalation against the Palestinian people, both in Gaza and the West Bank, continues. So I immediately think, well, Israel has had a bit of an image problem for the last 12 months or so, and Netanyahu's up before the International Criminal Court. And, one tactic of the Zionists is to paint themselves as the victims. So, of course, what better opportunity than to have ordinary Jewish people at a religious festival on the beach in Australia that provides easy victims. So I immediately think about that. And then because of the fact that the ISIS was originally funded, created by the CIA, I start to think, well, what's going on with America? And on the news at the moment, everybody looks in horror as the Americans look like they're going to overrun the Venezuelan government and are randomly killing people in boats. But if you take a step back and understand that this is not just a vendetta from the mad Trump government against Venezuela, but actually it's the Americans' attempt to keep the American region in, to call it their territory, and to drive China out. So everything that's going on around Venezuela is really associated with who controls the global money. Is it China or is it America? And of course, the third thing that I immediately think of is that it was very late in the piece that the Australian government actually finally said, well, the Palestinians have a right to exist and they have a right to a two-state solution. And Netanyahu has been incensed about that. And so I look at it and I think, well, you know, there's some kind of payback going on there. And interestingly enough, the Mossad, the Secret Service of Israel, are up to their eyeballs in the middle of the Australian investigation as to who were these two terrorists. And I look at that and I think, well, they're trying to control the narrative. So I'm deeply suspicious of the Americans and the Israelis because of that ISIS connection. Another thing that I just thought I'd point out, if you look at the sun sitting in the 22.5 degrees of Sagittarius, that's referred to as the 23rd degree of Sagittarius, the Sabian symbol for that is immigrants entering a new country. And of course, Australia has been founded upon people from all races to the decimation of the Aboriginal people. So it is a country full of immigrants. But particularly the Sabian symbolism is quite chilling. The 21st degree of Libra at the time, this is cast for 6:47 p.m. on the 14th of December, the Sabian symbol was a crowd upon a beach. That's very odd, isn't it? A crowd upon the beach. And there's the moon square Jupiter. And of course, the crowd upon the beach was made up of Jewish people at a festival. It was made up of surf lifesavers. It was made up of visitors to Australia. It was made up of families having picnics. It was made up of the police, all kinds of people. So we have the cross-section of the Australian community. And then if you notice the mystic rectangle, you see the green and the blue and the green and the blue. This is a very beautiful pattern that helps and guides and directs matters on the day at that particular time towards a beneficial outcome. And when I looked at the mystic rectangle, I couldn't help but think, well, actually the man that leapt upon one of the gunmen and seized the gun off of him, he's Syrian and he's in hospital for his trouble with a couple of bullets to the arm. And then there was a man by the name of Reuben Morrison, a Jewish man, who also leapt forward and threw a brick, and maybe other things, but at least one brick at the gunman and was shot dead in cold blood and has passed away. So we have a Syrian man and a Syrian Australian man living in Australia but of Syrian origin, and a Jewish man working together against the gunman. And I did read today that the Ahmed was actually, even though he'd come from Syria, he used to be, I don't know what year it was he came to Australia, but he was a policeman in Syria, which immediately helps me to understand why he would leap forward and rush towards danger. And then there was another man whose name nobody seems to know, who was an asylum seeker who assisted and then sort of asked the police not to shoot and got shot for his troubles and then attacked by the crowd because they wrongly thought he's a Middle Eastern person, he must be a terrorist, whereas in fact he's an Australian asylum seeker who was trying to help. So we have this very interesting cross-section. A Syrian man who's come here, an ultra-nationalist Jewish man, an asylum seeker. There was a Jewish couple, Boris and Sophia Jaman, who first saw the gunmen get out of their car and unloading weapons from their car, and they tried to intervene and they were murdered for their troubles. So I have this cross-section. And then, of course, we have policemen, young policemen who were fairly new to the job, who have been hospitalised. One man's lost an eye. Then there were lifesavers. Then there were householders. So I think the mystic rectangle shows the goodness of the cross-section of humanity in the chart, whereas the mutable T-square really, to me, talks about the what do they call it? It's like the gunmen with us that are the hired helps, the front men for ISIS, who's funded by the global cabal. Yes, so things are not always what we think. And then as I was pondering all of this, I suddenly remembered this writing that I'd entitled The Citadel of Love. And it's quite long. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Came through in 2003. It says, it's been many years since humanity stood at the edge of the abyss and looked into the possibilities of greater darkness on earth. And still the mayhem, disease, poverty, violence, greed on earth continues. How do we justify this? Surely the time has come for the tide of human destruction turn towards goodness. Surely the time has come for the tide of human kindness to move beyond a gentle swell, beyond a cascading wave, to a mighty oceanic sweep. What needs to happen for humanity to open their hearts to the suffering of others? Sometimes we feel the pain of others when we've suffered the same pain. Is this what it will take for humanity to rise up in love and kindness? Do we all need to suffer disease, poverty, injustice, or racial hatred before we come to the defence of our brothers and sisters? Do we all need to feel persecuted, vilified, marginalised before we will come to the defence of our fellow humans? You know, and I heard someone comment saying, well, of course, if 15 people had been murdered in cold blood on the beach in Gaza, it just probably wouldn't even make the headlines. And we've been witnessing this for a couple of years. But when it happens in Sydney, well, it gets our attention. So evil has come to Australia, maybe because we've been too complacent. The spiritual hierarchy of earth would like to know what it will take before we stand amassed, shoulder to shoulder, and cry enough. Just as the flag of liberty was raised by Jeanne d'Arc, so once again the flag of liberty has been raised on the inner levels of earth. Remember, this was 2003, 2 decades ago. Will you stand for your brothers and sisters? Will you stand for your compatriots? Will you stand for your family and friends? Will you stand for the unknown depressed? Will you stand for justice, liberty, and love? We stand. Hierarchy stand. It's a very interesting question that humanity is being asked early in the 21st century. So together we can make a difference. Together we will ride the storm to victory. Together we cry with one voice, justice, liberty, peace on earth. Together we will face the storm of darkness and drive it back. Together we will surround our planet with love. Together we unite within the heart of all. Together we can overcome. Do you remember the sweet victory of love? Do you remember the sweet victory of the protection of innocence? Do you remember the sweet victory of the refusal of the shadow? Will you stand with us? Sorry, it seems to me that the Australian people are standing because we witnessed people intervening and helping. Jewish, Syrian, immigrants, police, lifesavers, young and old. We witnessed it. But we are on notice that the global evil has come to our shores. There's a few links there. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you for your attention. Oh, actually, I got who I am, yes. And that full reading of The Citadel of Love is there if you want to have a look at it.